Nearly 3 months after it was sealed off from the world, Wuhan has opened its doors again. Highways and train lines have been opened to traffic, and its 11 million residents are now able to leave without specific authorization, but they still need an app that tracks their health and movement. Government figures show the vast majorities of China's coronavirus-related deaths were in Hubei province, where the city of Wuhan is located. Well, Katrina Yu now joins us live from Beijing. Katrina, it's now been 76 days since Wuhan residents were allowed to leave. Have we seen a bit of an exodus today?
Quite an exodus. You know, tens of thousands of people have been heading to airports, train stations and bus stations to leave Wuhan. More than 50,000 people bought train tickets ahead of today, and more than 6,000 are expected to get on flights heading out of Wuhan. People are also taking advantage of open borders, finally getting into their cars and also driving outside of the city. We're seeing roads and highways clogged for the first time, traffic in the city since the outbreak began. Now, since the lockdown began at the end of January, the transit hubs were the first to close. So 11 million residents found themselves sealed off from the rest of the country and indeed the world. And not only residents of Wuhan, but also workers and families who had traveled to the city for Chinese New Year, expecting to be there for only a few days, and 76 days later they were still stuck there. So many people are relieved to finally leave, to finally have that freedom, but not everyone in Wuhan does. There are still some people who are still confined to their homes because there are still active COVID-19 cases identified in their neighborhood, and if that is the case, they're still not allowed freedom of movement. But for the most part, especially in virus-free areas of the city, restaurants are open, malls are open, the subway has been operating for a few days now, and as long as people are wearing a mask, they can have their temperature checked, and as long as they have a mobile phone app which shows a green barcode declaring that they are healthy, they're able to come and go with relative ease.
Mm-hmm. Katrina, can you tell us a little more about how this app works? I mean, how do they decide if you actually get that little green barcode? Do you have to see a doctor first?
You don't necessarily have to see a doctor. Now, this all relies on China's big data surveillance system. So you first have to download an app into your phone and you input your details. And the main information, I think, really is your address. And your address will tell the proximity to a confirmed case. And based on that proximity, you'll be either given a red barcode, which says you are at risk or you're unhealthy, a yellow code, or a green code. And the green code means you're healthy and you're relatively free to travel around. So let me just show you what that green code looks like. So it's green and it has a QR code, and this is extremely important in Wuhan city. You cannot go anywhere without it. What you must do if you go into a bus, for example, if you go into a taxi, if you go into a convenience store or a restaurant, you present this green code and it's scanned by a machine in any of those places. And what that does, it registers your presence there in that shop, restaurant, or train carriage, for example. And what that means is if later down the track, authorities identify that there has been somebody with COVID-19 there in that train carriage with you, they will then automatically have all the data of all the people who were with you that day, and they will track you down and also put you under testing or into quarantine. So that's how that works in Wuhan. And a smaller level of that is also working around China. In Beijing, for example, if I go into a shopping center, I need to scan a barcode. It will have, and it will check according to my phone data if I have been outside of Beijing. And if I've been outside of Beijing, it will show them, and I won't be able to enter that premise, for example.
Katrina, I mean, more broadly in China, we've also been seeing these very low numbers of deaths over the last few days, but the numbers there have obviously been questioned since the very beginning of this outbreak. So as we see restrictions now being eased, how confident can the world be that China does have things under control?
Well, there seems to be a downward trend. I mean, we've had single-digit figures in terms of deaths and local transmissions of new cases for a few weeks now. The government has all but declared victory, saying the peak of the outbreak is well and truly over. They're quite keen, of course, to get the economy going. And at the same time, that is the caveat. These are official figures, and there is a lot of skepticism because these numbers are much lower than other countries, say the US or many European countries. So people are raising questions as to whether these are accurate and if indeed it is that safe to go out and commence normal life as has been happening here in China. But I think what the key thing to look at is really that even though these numbers may not be exact, the downward trend does seem to be true, just evidenced by, I guess, the confidence of the government in easing these restrictions. I think China and the Chinese government, they're very risk averse, and especially those living in Beijing, the last thing that they do want to see is a second wave of infections. They don't want to risk that anymore. And the fact that these Wuhan borders are easing, the fact that people are returning to normal life, that certainly seems to signal at least that China's leaders do genuinely believe that it's safe enough to get people going back to work. But of course, as you said, the numbers are still, they do seem very positive. I think 1,000 people are currently undergoing treatment for COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, 62 new cases, but only 2 of those new cases, or 2 or 3 of those were local transmissions. 59 were actually imported cases of Chinese nationals bringing the infection into the country. Foreign nationals are still banned, and even local travelers do still have to go undergo strict testing and strict quarantine when they arrive into a new city. So they are still very much keeping an eye on the outbreak here.
Katrina, you there for us in the Chinese capital. Thanks very much for that update, Katrina.